Alrighty, so today I'm going to be doing a meta update. This is August 25th, so we've had a few weeks of PQs since the Galactic Championships. So I think it's time to do a bit of a zoom out, see what's going on with the meta, see what decks are winning, see ways that we might be able to target the decks that are winning, and yeah, just going to cover all that. Before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. And if you're interested in some more content from me, do check out my Patreon as well. I now have Discord access to all subscribers in the Patreon. So if you're interested in that, you can take a look. All right. So what I'm going to do, break this up into like a few sections, but I'm going to review the meta. This includes taking a look at decks that are winning, more specifically decks that are top 8ing. I think you get a much clearer representation that way. We'll also be looking at some matchup breakdowns. We have some stats for that. So yeah, we'll be able to see what decks are winning, what decks have, in a way we get information about matchup percentages. It's not automatically the truth, right? There's a lot that goes into winning a game besides like a deck being favored into another one. So I'll kind of give you my anecdotal opinions as well as to how matchups break down and why some things might be succeeding. And finally, the last part of this, I will review some deck lists from recent PQs. I'm going to be focusing on a few of the larger PQs because I think you get more data that way, right? More rounds of Swiss means a more difficult bracket. So those are the ones I'll probably be focusing on. It's not going to be the main focus of this video. So if you're interested in even more deck lists and looking at that, then I recommend you do check up SOU Competitive Hub, which is where you can find a lot of lists from recent tournaments. But yeah, let's take a look first at top 8s. And this is also from SOU Competitive Hub. If you wanted to see even more of this list, you can scroll down even further there. But I cut this off basically when we got to the leader base only winning one event. So here you're going to see the leaders that have won multiple events. And at first, it's Quinlan. To me, that is not a surprise. I think it is the best deck in the game right now. And then maybe a surprise to some is to see Boba at number 2. Boba Data Vault has won 6 PQs. Boba as a hero has won, as a leader has won 7. Then we've got Han Blue. Again, to me, not so much of a surprise to see Han up there. And a few other usual suspects, right? Sabini CL, Kylo Tarkentown, Cad Tarkentown, Kira's 1-2, Anakin's 1-2, Palp. And then after that, you're just getting ones, and that list is going to go on for a while. There's a lot of leaders that have won PQs at this point. So the bigger focus here should be the ones that are kind of converting multiple times. But I do think we as a community put way too much focus on what deck or leader won a PQ. You often see it as the main focus of like a PQ or a review, right? A deck list review. It just looks at the winners. I mean, I do this too. It's not an indictment on anything, but I think this is not as important as what I'm going to show you next, which is this top 8s. This, I think, paints a much better picture of what's happening in events. Getting through the Swiss portion is the majority of what you are doing at an event. Once you get into the single elim bracket, first of all, a lot of the players are more seasoned at that point. Matchups, the matchup roulette becomes actually more important at that point because players are more seasoned. So skill gapping might actually decrease in that bracket. And now of course, it's going to matter. But I guess what I should say is the matchup itself will play a more important role than it does in Swiss. On top of that, you get way more data because for every PQ, you're getting 8 decks that reach the top 8 instead of one winner. And if you're putting all your attention on that one winner, you might think a lot of decks are more viable than they actually are because like we looked in the previous one, on this screen, you see Poe Data Vault, right? It's won a PQ, one of. Palp Yellow's won 2. Kira Data Vault has won 2. These are low percentage, like low, right? Except there really aren't that many PQs, so anything that's won one PQ is already in like the top 10 of winners. And you might think, oh, Poe Data Vault is one of the best decks, or whatever is coming below this Poe, or even this Palp, or the Anakin. In reality, once you get here, you're not going to see Poe Data Vault anymore. In fact, you might not see it until you get to like all the way at the bottom where it's like one has reached the top 8 and maybe he spiked that event. I'm not going to jump to conclusions. I did not scroll past here, which is 2 screens. So you're going to see all the way down to 6 top 8s. We got like Piet, Han Green, and Han Pilot. But in reality, decks can spike any event. It's consistency that separates them. So when you start looking at top 8s and putting more weight on that than just winning an event, you will start to pick up on which decks are actually consistently putting up results. And once again, we see Quinlan at the top. To me, it's not a surprise, with Han 2 being the second. Between blue and green, there's 50 of them. There's 42 Han blues. To me, that's a bracket of its own. Quinlan and Han, to me, are the 2 most consistent and decks that are going to give you probably the highest win rate overall. But then after that, I would say the bracket is just incredibly wide. I think this meta is incredibly wide open, for better or worse. I don't think that's always necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but it's very wide. We can scroll all the way down here, right? We see in 11 Talzins, which maybe to some would say it's low, especially after it won Galactic Championship. 10 Palps, 9 Yodas. We got 7 Kira Data Vault, 7 Kylo Data Vault. That's like maybe together that's blue green villain Data Vault, making up like 3.5% of the meta. We got Luke pilots. If you want to, you can keep scrolling down, but you're going to see a lot of decks have reached like 6, 5 top 8s. And all the way down to here, we can see in the double digits, there's 10 on this page and another 2 on the next page. That's a lot of decks that you might encounter in a PQ. It's a ton. It's very difficult to kind of metagame against this wide of a field, especially when the decks currently being played are playing on such different axes, right? You've got Hero Force grindy decks. You've got a few different pilot style decks, Boba, Vader, Luke. Basically pure space decks, right? You've got pure aggro, like Sabine, still around. The Force decks, like I mentioned, they're split into like 3 different camps between Han, Anakin, and Yoda. And actually even Han Green, if you want to separate that even further. You've got Palp lingering around here, just like mid-range Crusher. Then you've got these like nickel-dime decks like Quinlan, Cad, and Talzin, making up a huge proportion if you combine all those together. You've got the combo deck of Kylo. You've got the hard control of Iden Data Vault. You've got ECL villain green, right? Vader ECL decks. The highest representation here is Gar ECL. But if you go further down, you'll probably see like Kylo ECL with a few appearances, maybe even Kira ECL or Thrawn ECL, whatever it may be. So lots of different things you need to account for. Very, very difficult to metagame for it, which is why I think we see a deck like Quinlan and Han all the way at the top, because those decks can't easily be hated out that much. Yes, they have some negative matchups, but they're not going to have a negative matchup, let's say, the way a Palp does into a Sabine, or the way maybe a Cad or a Talzin does into a villain control deck. So because of that, you see them being incredibly consistent decks. And Boba is probably the biggest riser over the next couple weeks. It's won a lot of events. It's gotten a lot of top 8s, but it's certainly now in the public eye, and I think you're going to see more tech potentially against that style, right? Which may include things like Bamboozle or more upgrade removal, specifically to make the Boba flip a little more dangerous. You might even see anti-ramp stuff like Champ Syndulla creep into more decks, because Boba Data Vault ramps, right? It's a ramp deck. A lot of the time its main focus is to ramp on turn 2. Not always, but a decent amount of time. So whatever it may be, it's now solidified itself into a real meta contender. So we're going to have to account for it. But the moment you start accounting more for something like a Boba pilot deck, you're losing space for some other decks. And it's why it's very difficult to metagame right now in general. Because as I mentioned, every deck attacks in a very different, or every like bucket of decks that I mentioned attack in a very different way and require very different answers. All right, let's go over to SuBase.com, and I'm just going to be here briefly, but if you want to see more matchup percentages and play around with a lot of data, you can definitely do that here. But here's just like a flat win rate from tournaments for some of the top decks. So we see Han 2 winning at close to a 54% win rate. It's a very solid win rate, but both Talzin and Vader are sub 50. To me, it's not that much a surprise. Talzin, although I think is a solid deck, it has negative matchups and also like into control deck specifically, but also doesn't have many auto win style matchups, right? And because of that, it starts to gonna get pushed down in the win rate, whereas a deck like Quinlan, which is actually a very similar deck, does not have nearly as bad as a control matchup as Talzin, and you see it has the highest win rate on this list at close to a 56%. Now, every deck you're seeing here other than Talzin and Vader have an over 50% win rate, and that's not so much of a surprise because there's tons of decks being played. So you're going to see, if you scrolled even further, you would start seeing all the fringier decks, and they're all going to have lower win rates, right? Because the decks that have solidified themselves as meta present or meta winning decks tend to be over 50% win rate because they're kind of beating up on all the like subpar decks, I should say, that are getting played, especially earlier in rounds in events. So maybe this chart is one piece of data that you need to say, okay, maybe Talzin and Vader isn't it. Maybe they have kind of been surpassed. Maybe Vader has been surpassed by something like Boba in terms of which like space-focused aggressive deck is sturdier into the meta. Maybe Talzin has been surpassed by the likes of Quinlan and Cad Bane for which of these like pseudo dink and dunk style board control-y decks is better, and so forth. Now, I'm also going to look here at specific matchup breakdowns. So you can see even more decks if I just clipped a piece of this. But, you know, if you look at Han, again, the first one on this list, you can see green is good, dark red is bad, and then like light red is kind of in the middle there. And I think you need to take these also with a grain of salt because this is going to include a lot of matchups, and frankly, a lot of this game does come to skill differential. So a poor matchup can beat and like an unfavored deck can beat a favored deck in the heads up if the pilot is more seasoned. And I think when you start to see numbers close, like 45 to 55 in that area, you can probably like think, okay, maybe this is just an anomaly, but certainly you get information here. And then if it's going to coincide with what I think, I'm going to pay more attention to it, right? So I see Han being favored into Talzin, but barely, right? 51%. That's a wash to me. I've always thought that matchup's pretty close, and that win rate isn't that relevant to me. Now, 61% into Darth Vader, that tracks for me. I think Han is good into that deck. In fact, I think he's good into most of these pilot decks. You can see he has a 65% win rate into Boba Fett. Not a surprise to me. Like, the number itself might be surprising, but I would have been like, yes, he's favored. He's also favored into Sabine. That tracks for me. Unfavored into Quinlan, like, I think, again, pretty even matchup. It's only 45% here. That could account for a lot of things. Maybe more seasoned Quinlans ended up playing less seasoned Hans. Han is still probably played at a higher rate than Quinlan. So, you know, I'll take that with a grain of salt, but maybe as someone who's played Quinlan at these events, I usually think that matchup's pretty even. Han being unfavored into Kylo Tarkintown tracks. I think that's a difficult matchup for Han, and so on. If you look at Talzin's basically red across the board, other than like Vader at a barely positive win rate and Sabine is like a 50-50. Some of that doesn't completely track for me, but I'm not super surprised that she's struggling into some of these matchups. It's not like by a lot. They're all in like the 40-ish percentile until you get to like Kira and Palp, in which case, yes, I do think Kira and Palp kind of dominate Talzin. But the rest of this stuff is mostly in the maybe we need to like take it with a grain of salt territory. Vader, negative win rate into almost every top deck. I think the problem with the Darth Vader deck is very easy to tech against it. There's a lot of cards that are just very good against it. Force Throw, of course, is just innately a powerful card against this deck. Decks like Quinlan have a ton of space in them. Han, just leading Grogu, can sometimes be unbeatable. The Boba deck, being a 22% win rate into the Boba deck is awful. Like, at this point, with Boba rising up the ranks and playability, is very difficult to recommend suiting up Darth Vader. Now, if you look at Quinlan, Quinlan's in that middle range in most of its matchups, somewhere between like 40 and 60% for almost everything, with negative win rates into Kira, which makes sense to me because its more difficult matchups are like the blue-green villainous decks. A little unfavored into Sabine, which makes sense to me as well, because mostly Quinlan isn't being teched heavily against Sabine, because Sabine's not near the top of the meta right now. And Sabine, another one that's sitting right in the like middle area for most of its matchups, although it absolutely dominates Yoda and Palp, no surprise there, does have a really tricky Han matchup, and then like close matchups throughout. But I'll let you kind of look at the rest of this. It's really cool to kind of play around with this data and see if it like matches your perception, right? Because I'm not going to say my perception is 100% right, but I'm also not going to be like, this data is proof that Quinlan is a 55.6% win rate into Darth Vader. You cannot argue with that because it says it on the screen. Well, none of this is like perfect science, because there's always two humans involved in any game, and if one person knows what they're doing and one person doesn't, of course the person that knows what they're doing is going to win. Right now, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but there's a lot that factors into who wins a match of Star Wars Unlimited besides what deck is technically favored. And always remember that don't just cite stats, don't just look at which deck won and therefore it's the best deck. There's a lot that goes into it. And if you're really interested to see pathways to victory, I recommend you go into SW Competitive Hub, open up the link to the deck list, which takes you to the Melee page for the tournaments, and you can hover over someone's match history for that tournament and be like, oh, okay, that's why this deck won. This Darth Vader won the tournament, but it did not ever have to play against a Boba or a Han in this whole tournament. It had like some of its better matchups, right? And it tracks, right? Versus just being like, oh, it won, it's perfect, right? There's always a pathway to victory, and a lot of decks, especially ones that are winning either like as one-off attempts or repeated attempts, whatever it may be, are winning because of their pathway there. And that includes at large tournaments. It's just part of it is the matchup roulette, I should say. All right, so let's kind of zoom out again. What are we doing with this information? So as I mentioned, the meta is incredibly wide open. I get asked often, what should I play? It's a common question, and I don't fault anyone for asking. And I usually have kind of a two-part answer to this. I say, right now, play Quinlan or play Han Blue. And if you don't want to play either of those decks, play anything you want, basically. And I say that a bit as a joke, but sort of not also. The meta is incredibly wide open. If you don't want to play one of the two like really sturdy decks that don't have major swings in their matchups, then you have tons of options. You can play Palp and hope to not play against like hard aggro. You can play a ton of different things right now. You can like play Sabine, hope you don't play against like the Han. You can do whatever you want. You just have to be okay with that decision. There's a lot of spread decks, and like spread decks are basically decks that have wide matchup like rates, right? Like decks that have very positive matchups on one end, but very negative matchups on the other. Those kinds of decks are just really common right now because of how wide this meta is, because of how difficult it is to actually tech against so much. You just kind of have to pick your poison. So if you're not going to go with one of the two top decks that kind of don't have to engage in the pick your poison sort of battle, then it really opens up a ton for you, right? Some of the I will say, like, kind of anecdotally, a little bit of a issue I have with the format, and it goes way beyond force throw at this point. It's just how matchups are very opening dependent, like opening hand dependent. There's a lot of incredibly swingy turn ones in this game right now. You can look at like Kylo Tarkentown when the games they open Migs Mayfield versus not. Han 2 with Ogdo Bogdo, right? It's a big change. The matchups where, for instance, you're playing like a force mirror or something, and like one person goes first and plays like an Ogdo Bogdo, and then like a Han deck or something. The games where you do open with like double force throw. The games where you're Boba Data Vault and you're going first and you play Admiral Pride. There's a lot of these like very powerful turn ones in a lot of different situations and in a lot of different matchups. And it creates very swingy gameplay early on. I don't think we've ever seen a format where turn one is like as game breaking sometimes as it is in this format. And you see tons of swings. And even though the format's kind of balanced, like the win rates of decks are like relatively stable, individual games sometimes don't feel very balanced because of how swingy openings can be. Another thing that's kind of on the rise right now that we haven't seen at this rate is pilots, right? We have two heavily played pilot decks between Vader and Boba, and a few others like Luke and Kazuda, even Poe making an appearance. It's creating kind of two ships passing in the night gameplay, right? There's a lot of decks that are just like ground decks and a lot of decks that are just space decks, and we're seeing a little bit of solitaire style game with minimal interaction because of the ways these decks are constructed. In fact, the pilot decks are on the rise because of how they can kind of ignore the whole mechanic of this force world that's going on and just kind of play a different game. And as I mentioned, you can play decks with wide matchup spreads and it can work out. It can also not work out, right? And you have to be okay with that decision. So if you're not going to play the best stuff, which in my opinion right now is Quinlan or Han Blue, then you can play kind of almost anything you'd like. Keep in mind there's also decks that have, like, there are decks now you can play that do have a little bit more of a silver bullet angle to them when it comes to other people teching against you. A really notable one is like Bamboozle against pilot decks. It doesn't mean you can ever beat that card, but it is like a major issue, right? Or if you're playing Kylo and people play like Aggrieved Parliamentarian, right? It's not that you can't beat it, it's just like very powerful sideboard cards that can be teched against you. If you're playing Vader, it's things like Bombing Run or Grenade Strike, or someone playing like the Jedi Starfighter, the 1/4 that pings, whatever it may be. There are a lot of cards that can target specific decks. So those can create some more swingy gameplay. And if you're not interested in that, then you can't play a deck that can get teched against in that manner. All right, so the last thing I'm going to do is open up SW Competitive Hub and just review a few lists. It's not going to be like a ton of them. I just want to open up a few of the more recent larger PQs, take a look at some top 8s, maybe highlight some new decks, take a look at some older ones that might be being built a different way. But yeah, if you're, like I said, if you're interested in more content from me, do check out my Patreon. I've got a lot going on there. And yeah, let's move over to SW Competitive Hub. All right, so here we're in the tournament results section of SW Competitive Hub. I'm going to pick and choose just a few of these events, take a look at some of the lists. I'm going to start up here with the one that happened in France here, 83 players. The winner here, his name's Alex, a very good player. I believe he would have finished near the top of the leaderboard in Season 1, and he took this down with Anakin Blue. So for all of you interested in like a different kind of hero force deck, right? This goes in that pile with Han and Yoda, but Anakin operates slightly differently. This could be a very good place to start. A few notes. The Jedi Starfighter has a little more bang in an Anakin deck where it can attack for 3 power, and because it has 4 health, it can survive attacking into most space units played early, while also being an incredible card against like the Vader deck. So probably one of your best openers into Vader. There's also 3 Entrench in this main deck, because those are really the only space units. So Entrench is kind of like pseudo removal into space as well. I like the inclusion of Marin in this list, because Marin with Anakin is actually a unit that can attack for 6 with 1 action, 4 from the Anakin attack and then 2 from the discard effect. It also synergizes decently well with some of the splashed villainous cards like Force Lightning and Power the Dark Side to turn on the new legendary Anakin. The rest of the cards are mostly things you've grown accustomed to seeing in blue-red Force decks. You see some Rivals Fall in the main deck, likely to be a little more teched for Kylo and potentially some other decks as well. Interesting to me is only 1 crate in the main deck, and then a second one in the sideboard, since most of the time you see 2 or 3 in these lists in the main deck. But Anakin being a leader that helps you close out games built into himself, might allow you to get away with that in the main deck when you don't need it as much. You see post-sports and bombing runs as well to help more with that space. Some confiscates for pilots and other shenanigans. The third pillage, which for more control, but I think you also see sometimes people playing pillages against things like Quinlan or Talzin or Vader, any decks that might get pinched in their hand a little earlier in the game. But yeah, if you're interested in this archetype of hero force, but are kind of tired of playing Han or something, you can definitely look at this one. This is a 53 card deck, so that's why you see a little more stuff fit into this main deck than you might otherwise be accustomed to seeing. Some other lists here. I mean, this was like a meta top 8, right? You see Boba, Data Vault, Talzin, 2 Quinlans, 2 Cads, a Kylo. But Anakin is probably the least meta of the bunch in that French event. And like I mentioned earlier, right? What did I do? I went straight to the winning deck list, even though, I think the whole top 8 is probably worth exploring. And even sometimes past the top 8, often the few people that make it towards the bottom of the top 8 list are people with the same record as others that have bubbled out. So they mostly just got in on tiebreakers. So not necessarily like that they won more games. And I think you can definitely look at some more lists. I am going to open one more because Noxum is actually the owner of this website. So let's take a look at his CAD deck. This is kind of the new wave of CAD. It's little guys CAD, weenie 1-drops CAD, right? You see 15 1-drops in this deck, 12 of which are Underworld, and then you see, actually it's 14 1-drops, two Death Star Stormtroopers. And the gimmick with this CAD is that often in these Tarkin Town meta, people don't play into your Tarkin Town on turn 1. A lot of decks don't have to. They can just pass into the Cad Bane or whatever it might be. But this deck kind of turns that around. Because they're playing so many 1-drops, what the CAD player will do is just play a 1-drop. If one of them is Death Star Stormtrooper in the opening hand, that will be the one that is played first because it's not an Underworld. It kind of forces your opponent to play into you now because you've already established something on the board, in which case you then play your second 1-drop, the Underworld one, ping, Tarkin Town, and now you got 2 units, your opponent has none, and now you're an aggro deck. And this deck really is an aggro deck. It's not like a typical CAD deck that is a little more board control centric. This is an aggro through and through. You even see Darth Maul's lightsaber here just for 4 power on a 3 equip. And yeah, you are playing a high density of like chaffy sort of units, right? There's 15 1-drops in this deck. There's barely any 2s, right? It's just 2 Aura Sings and a Bazine. So you're usually just going double 1-drop into the 3-drop turn, which is either like Mist Hunter or Boba. Maybe you throw in like a pump somewhere there. You do have the Forlom Zuckuss stuff and Ruthless Raiders, but nothing past that, right? You don't even see Cad Bane in this main deck. You see one in the sideboard. So it is an aggro deck. This is aggro Cad, and it exploits a different element of the game where so many people have grown accustomed to how they play against Tarkhan Town, and this Cad deck plays a little differently than the traditional Cad Bane deck that we've seen pop up here and there. But interesting deck for sure. All right, let's go into another tournament now. So this 128 person was a limited one, but here's a 79 person tournament in Slovakia. And this was won by a Boba Data Vault, which, you know, it is the second most winning deck right now for first place. And a lot of these decks are pretty similar. This one, I'd say, like, I see them either like this one, or sometimes they play Invisible Hand. This version of the deck, I do not see Invisible Hand, so not as dense in the 6-drop slot, but you do sometimes see that, and then a little more droids. But this deck is just, you know, pushing a ton of damage. It's ramping. It's presenting really difficult to kill space units like the Dornian gunship, and you know, you hop on it. You go face. Your Boba can really help clear a bunch of units when he flips. You do have some weaknesses into things like Bamboozle, but it's not like an auto loss. There are ways to maneuver, especially because you can go to the ground. Planetary Bombardment helps close out games. Devastator helps close out games. It is a very linear style deck. In fact, a lot of what this deck is trying to do is completely ignore what's happening on the ground. And apologies, the deck image isn't loading here, but we do have the deck list on screen. But yeah, you see a couple Darth Vader pilots, right? That's just, you know, you don't think your opponent's exhausted out. You can push a bunch of damage in. A lot of what you're doing is putting your opponent in really weird spots with how they have to navigate the indirect damage, and then you have ways to kind of clean up the board with IG, with Barrage, of course, with Ruthless Raider when it comes down, of course, your Boba flip. And there's a little bit of ground. In fact, the turn 1 is usually when you play most of your ground units until you get to like Maul to help close out games. And if you're interested in kind of like ignoring a lot of what's happening in a lot of matchups and just like kind of doing your own thing, pushing tons of damage in space, just kind of asking most of the questions in the game and hoping your opponent doesn't have the answer or just doesn't know, like, sequence their answers correctly, then you can definitely win a lot of games. And I think this is one of the top decks in the meta right now. The rest of this top 8, pretty standard other than the second place, which is the Han Pilot. And in fact, this whole top 8, the top 4 were all pilot decks, 2 Vaders, the Han and the Boba. If you want to take a look briefly at this Han Pilot deck, you know, it's similar to the one that was in the Galactic Championships top 8, with an addition here of the Tactical Heavy Bomber, which, you know, if you flip onto it with Han, ready some resources, and then you can ready the card itself with something like BB-8 and attack for 6+6 indirect. It's a really nice combo. If you wanted to even go more into the combo with that, you can also play K-Turn, Qui-Gon Turn, which would also ready it. It's something I dabbled in when the deck first, when the leader was first previewed. It wasn't a very consistent combo, but it is present in this deck, at least lightly, with BB-8 and Tactical Heavy Bomber. But it is another one of those decks that's usually playing 2 units on turn 1, unless you have the magic start of C-3PO, because C-3PO is completely broken with this leader where you just draw a card every turn. And you're just an aggro space deck. And there are a lot of these decks floating around. There's a lot of Silver Bullet-y style cards against these decks, so you have to be careful with that. All right. Next up, we are going to take a look at the Cherry Hill, New Jersey PQ that was won by Sabine. And Sabine has not won very many tournaments recently, but it's still lurking around there. It's gone through some changes. You don't see Darksaber in this list. You see Yoda's lightsaber just going cheaper. There is more upgrade removal floating around, and it's a little dangerous to be trying to equip Sabine when people are like force throwing themselves over and over again and kill your units. So less investment in that. You don't even see Wing Leader in this deck either, right? So we're much lighter on the upgrade style effects. You do still see Chewbacca, 2 of. Interesting to see the probe droid that blows up upgrades as another 2-drop option in this deck, because it's not a rebel, so it doesn't synergize with like Rebel Assault and Fleet Lieutenant. But I kind of get it. There are a decent amount of people trying to suit up some stuff. So it could definitely catch someone if they're not expecting like main deck upgrade removal. Other than that, it's Sabine. It's still a very good deck. I think the meta's not super favorable for Sabine, in my opinion, right now. When you see like the Hero Force decks being pretty popular, and especially Han being pretty favorable into Sabine. But it's certainly a deck that has the power level to win events moving forward. And we're going to take a look at this Kaz that finished second place, Kaz Data Vault. Apparently you can play Data Vault with any leader and the deck just becomes good, or so I'm told. But this is another aggro deck, and you're just playing with 33 health, so you can race a bunch of other people. It's primarily, again, a space deck, although there is a decent amount of ground here. Although don't be fooled by the amount of ground you can see on the screen. A lot of those cards are pilots. Poe, Luke, Han, Chewbacca are all pilots, but you do see Battlefield Marine, Contracted Hunter, which has a very good synergy with Kaz, Kira, and in conjunction with lots of main deck discard, right? You see Kira, Jam, and Spark. You're trying to prevent blowouts. You hit the Bamboozle with your Jam. You hit the Force Throws, they can't one-shot your leader. You take the Barrage out, whatever it may be. You have cheap interaction for your flip turn, so you can kind of set that up. And then you're trying to create a threat that your opponent can't deal with, and bam, you hit your opponent in the face a lot. It's what a lot of these decks are doing. Kaz is probably the most aggro of all of them, because it's the 4-drop leader version of it. But, same as Han, same as Vader, same as Boba, same as like the Luke pilot, right? These decks are trying to create very difficult to interact with boards because they're all in space, and they create giant units with their pilots. And this deck is actually like even more in on the like prevention of interaction, because they have so much discard and Kira, so really trying to protect this Kazuda flip. All right, now we're gonna go into the next PQ. Let's take a look. We're gonna look at the California PQ. Now this had 113 players. It was the largest PQ of the most recent weekend. This was won by the Poe Data Vault that I talked about earlier, the one that has won. Now Poe is in the PQ winner territory. But very interesting to see is that there was also a Poe ECL in this top 8. So California liking the Poe, but let's take a look. Like I said, apparently you can put Data Vault in any deck and it just starts winning more. But here you go. Lots of space, some pilots, a bunch of damage, right? Heroic Sacks, Trench Runs, for a cause, and you're a pilot leader, although this one's a little different because instead of creating a giant threat, you're just kind of upgrading all your threats a little bit, and then kind of getting one shot on the ground with your Poe. Heroic Sack, incredibly important for the Poe leader because you create some really big turns where he jumps on a unit on that flip turn, pushes damage with Heroic Sack. Then because your leader doesn't need to actually be readied when he's in the leader zone to deploy onto the ground, you get to then flip him as a leader, and bam, push even more damage. But I don't have like much more to say specifically about this. We saw the Kaz, we saw the Han. These decks are doing all incredibly similar things, just different flavors of it, which is ignore the ground arena, create difficult to interact with boards, and push a bunch of damage. Whether or not they're doing it by spamming 1-drops like Han and Vader, doing it by creating big robust units that push a bunch of burn like Boba, or like Kaz where it's like flipping early and creating a monstrosity, or this Poe deck, which is like more similar probably like to the Luke Data Vault pilot deck, where we're playing more real-ish units. This isn't like a one-drop spam deck, just playing like good rate space units and kind of going with that. But, you know, this pilot stuff is definitely growing in popularity, and maybe we need to be a little concerned with what's going to happen after rotation with these pilots when we see things like Bamboozle get rotated out, Confiscate rotated out, Rivals Fall rotated out, and whatever else unless we get a bunch of similar things rotate in. We see 3 Quinlans in this top 8. You see a Sabine. There's a Gari CL. Let's take a look at the Gari CL. We haven't opened one recently. So this is a version of the Vader ECL pool of decks. Gar's a little more aggressive because the units themselves can push more damage. It's less dependent on like ramp. You see, we're not even playing it, right? So this is a curve out villain ECL deck where most of them are ramp decks. But there's so many shielded units now that you just have a lot of these really powerful things. Wingman Victor is actually a really nice inclusion because he buffs even more than normal, right? This card is like 2 instances of +2/+1 on 2 different units as a pilot, which is really nice when you're trying to push damage. It's 1 resource to add 4 damage into play instead of 2. Where it's how it would normally operate, but yeah, a cool deck. We'll also take a look at this Talzin Yellow, and they're actually, I see CBG, so possibly teammates here, although I'm not 100% sure. But Talzin Yellow is a deck that I was really interested in the start, primarily because you get to do Xian Flurry plus Vader. This version is not playing that combo, which is like what kind of first got me interested in Talzin. But, you know, what's good in yellow? Shin Hati, of course, is like one of the best 3-drops, and it is a force unit. P38 works really well with Talzin's ability because you get to shrink and ping, and you just kind of like get all this chip damage. You get Hotshot Blasters and Surprise Strike, so you get to skew a little more aggro. What you lose, of course, from like more traditional Talzin builds is like there's not a lot of good force units, especially because you lose all the red. Not that red has tremendous force units, but has more than you would see in yellow. Yellow is basically just Shin Hati and nothing else. So it's a little more aggro-centric. You don't get Force, or you don't get Force Lightning. I think the power ceiling's a little lower, but you get to push more damage earlier in games. All right, let's take a look at maybe one more PQ, and this is, or maybe 2. We're gonna take a look at the Virginia one, and I had a bunch of teammates at this event. One of them, Michael here, was in the final. He lost to the winner, which is Paul Heaver, and he took this down with Han Blue. We'll look at this briefly, right? Han Blue is Han Blue. Tranquility's in the sideboard. This is for the loop with hard, especially against control decks, right? Once you have one Tranquility, it can get the other Tranquility, and then they kill your Tranquility, you get the other Tranquility with the first Tranquility, and you know, it's kind of like an infinite card advantage sort of loop. You do see Force Lightning and Power of the Dark Side, same as we saw with the Anakin deck, as the splashed villainous cards in this deck to turn on the Anakin, and it looks like a lot of people are kind of working in that direction at this point. Entrenched in the main deck, so even more insulation against all these pilots, and we're seeing a lot of them, so that makes sense to me. Post board, you got Bombing Runs, you got Chams, Fell the Dragons in the sideboard. You often see those in the main deck, but I guess because Power of the Dark Side is there and Force Lightning, Paul found that he didn't need as much hard removal because he was kind of splashing some hard removal. And yeah, this is Han Blue. Michael's list, Talzin Red. We haven't looked at one of those. Talzin's a fantastic deck. Like I said, I think it does have some negative matchups right now overall. So like in the pool between Cad and Quinlan and Talzin, I would defer to Quinlan. I think it has the most even spread, but lots of pumps here. We see 2 Arm to the Teeth, 2 Hotshot Blasters, so like smuggle equity in this deck is nice, and 3 Devastators in the main deck, so you really went for like a lot of reach. It's gonna help a little more into the like control decks where you're already a little disadvantaged. 2 Suns, which is also a card that can push damage out of nowhere. The General Grievous is really interesting because, you know, it's obviously not a force unit. how good is a 4/4 in this meta? There are some 2/4s in this world right now, but there's also a lot of 5 health 3 drops. So I don't know how good Grievous is overall. I think he's probably certainly weaker into Tarkin Town decks where he can get pinged Tarkin Town off the board. But there's not a lot else other than something like Marin that you can include in that spot, unless you just didn't want to play a unit there. But yeah, good job to Michael getting to the finals here. He went undefeated in the Swiss and just lost 2-1 to the aforementioned Han. We're going to look at a couple other decks. This is Josh, another teammate, and he's playing the Kylo Tarkin Town that was kind of popularized by Bothan Network during Galactic Championships, and this deck has certainly become a meta-dominant deck, not like winning everything, but winning a lot, and something you definitely need to consider. It's a big reason you see a Grief Parliamentarian in so many sideboards. Things like Bamboozle are pretty good at it too, especially when you're being aggressive. But, tons of upgrades. The incredible power play of starting games with like Migs, with Tarkin Town, or Witch of the Mist with Force Throw, all very powerful. It's one of the smoothest Anakin Skywalker decks because you've got the self-discard with Kylo, so you play a few of these heroic upgrades and you can just turn it on. You see Devastators in this main deck, so in case you are able to like push a bunch of damage with your leader, but then your leader gets answered, you still have reach, which is something that the deck kind of lacks, right? If the Kylo doesn't win the game for you, there's often not a lot of avenues for winning after that, but Devastator gives you a few more. So nice work to Josh here. And we're going to take a look at one more of these decks, and that's Duncan Howard's Bossk, because this is another teammate. So I had 3 teammates, members of my testing team that all, did really well at this event. So we're a little biased here, but we're going to take a look. And this is Boss Blue, and Duncan loves playing control decks. And, he played Kira Data Vault to a near top 8 finish at Galactics. And here we have Boss Blue. This is like old school hard control. Bossk was kind of like the one that took over that mantle for a while there. I think you see more Iden now than you do Bossk, but here you've got the bounties, and I think Bossk is actually better into like something like Sabine specifically than an Iden deck is, because he can compete for the board earlier. Deathmark, top target, all help him like chip away at units early in the game because of Bossk's ability. The double heals with Bossk and either the client or top target are insane. You see the finishers here: Palpatine, Snoke, Avenger. Those are pretty standard for a Bossk build. The restock in the main deck makes sense to me. You see 3 fine additions, which is not something that was always included in these Bossk decks. But now also because of Force Throw, you've got a 0 to pitch in case you need it. You can also steal opponents' upgrades, which is fun. With I don't know how often that's going to come up, but it is a nice little thing you can do. And Charlton used to be a very important main deck inclusion, but because of like Sabine specifically being not so high in the meta, you see these Charltons in the sideboard, and you see Bazines and another restock, and that's presumably for any kind of mirror matchy style game where you need to be able to like strip vigilance or your opponent's restock from their hand. All right, and you know what? We were already being biased and taking a look at some teammates' decks, so we're gonna look at the main one as well. Oh, I clicked Michigan. So I had 3 teammates in the top 8 here as well. In Alexander the Greatest. So Alex here with Quinlan Tarkin Town. The winner was Kira Data Vault. We can take a look at this. This is Cal from Mythic Force. I like this. Definitely a bit of a different take, specifically because we've got Ogdo Bogdo in this deck, but I like specifically the combination of including Ogdo Bogdo with Craving Power. So your 3 Craving Power, 3 Barrage. Now we have more chunky units that can sit around and not rely on only the Kira to kind of get you there. So that's probably like the biggest change here. You notice there's only 2 Darth Vaders, the 7 drops, and I think a lot of that has to do with not as many hits in this deck. You don't see, other than Super Laser Tag, we're not actually including any 3-drop hits that you often see in Kira, like Death Trooper or the Phase Trooper or a Space Sentinel, whatever it may be. So you see only 2 Vaders and 2 Mauls to compensate. I see 1 Salacious Crumb, which could be cute if you open with Ogdo, or he can get pulled out with Vader sometimes to get 2 units. 1 Anakin. You know, there's no heroic cards here. I guess Anakin's okay. And another different thing in this deck is the Resupply Carrier. And you see that card much more often in like Iden Data Vault, where it's all about reaching that Super Laser Blast. And I think it's probably kind of serving the same role here. It's to go from 6 to 8. It's playing 3 Super Laser Blasts in this deck. So the take here, right, is a few changes, more reliant on the Super Laser Blast with the Resupply Carrier and then the Ogdo Craving Power combination. And, you know, he took this down, so nice job. And let's take a look real quickly at the Quinlan deck that Alex played. We don't need to spend too much time here. This is the deck I gave him. Very similar to what I played at Galactics. So if you're a member of my Patreon, you already would have this, but this is the list. It's, you know, there's not a ton changing right now with Quinlan. You have to kind of make calls. Daring Raid or no Daring Raid? Do you want Sparks in the main? Do you want Waylay in the main? Do you maybe want Bamboozle in the main now? Are you going to play 2 Falcons or 3 Falcons and try to squeeze in something else? How much do you want to play like bigger things for like Mirrors and Talzins, whether it's like Fennec or extra Depa? Do you want Lance Speeders? Do you want them in the main or the side? Personally, if you're going to include them in the main, I think you can't really be playing them in place of other turn 1s because it's not a good turn 1 in any matchup. Any deck that plays units that Land Speeder would kill shouldn't be playing a unit on turn 1 against you anyway until after you play first. So Land Speeder is usually more of a follow-up play, a turn 2 or turn 3 play, and because of that, if you're using it to eat up turn 1 equity, you're going to stop. There's going to be a non-zero time where your turn 1 has to be Land Speeder because you don't draw something else, and it feels really bad. It can't even hold a blaster because it's a vehicle. But I do like it in some matchups, like in the Mirror against decks that do play like Secretive Sage. Even sometimes, Kylo Tarkin does play Secretive Sage, but it also plays Migs. So there are places where you want to bring it in, but not so much by replacing other 2-drops, but sometimes replacing larger cards. And then we are going to look at KTOD Maddie, so another teammate. He's also playing Quinlan. He played the same main deck that Alex, but he's playing Grenade Strikes in the sideboard instead of a Garreeve Parliamentarian. It's the only change, but I just wanted to shout out Maddie and also say Grenade Strike definitely has some places. If you're trying to like tech a little more for Vader specifically, it's certainly very good there. There are some like incidental other areas where you can weave this in, like kill a unit, ping 1, Tarkin Town that second unit, maybe still deploy like a 2-drop on like your 4 resource turn and like kind of weave together a pretty powerful turn that way. So if you're interested in a little more against Vader and having a little more utility there, Grenade Strike becomes an option. And then Mike, Bobby Sapphire, last one we'll cover, another teammate. He's playing the CAD 1-drop style version. He went a little bigger than you might have seen in the previous one we covered because he does still play the Cad Bane in the main deck and added in sneak attacks. So the sneak attack with Cad can really end games. Sneak attack with Ruthless Raider, of course, can end games. But the gist of it remains very similar to what I had mentioned when I covered Noxum's CAD 1-drop style deck. But yeah, good job to Mike as well for hitting this top 8, starting to accrue some of those points for the Galactic Invitation. So that's what I got for all of you. If you were interested in checking out more of these decks, right, you can see tournament results, you can see the meta breakdowns, you can even see the leaderboard from Season 0 and presumably Season 1 coming shortly. But yeah, this is a great resource to check out. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think. And until next time, take care.